Hi, welcome. This is Nothing But Fine, and I'm Emily Trotter, and we're going to talk about the Bible. Not only that, but we're talking about women. Thank you for being here. I'm glad you're tuning in. If you do not or have not already, head over to YouTube and check it out. You can see this as well as hear it. So if you can see me right now, thank you so much. Last time I checked, there were now 20 subscribers on YouTube. That means me, Jim, and 18 more of you. That's fantastic. I really appreciate that. And not only that, not only am I on YouTube, but you can also go to nothingbutfine.com and find all kinds of stuff there. There are always notes for every episode, and you never know what might be in there. I might put a song in there. I might do a book that I've referenced, but it's always a little bit of insight. Very rarely is it exactly what I've said. So it's a little extra. It's a little extra commentary from yours truly. Welcome. Glad you're here. This is gonna be the last of the series in the women that we've been talking about. And I'm really excited that we're going out with two great ones. And because I've talked a lot about the women in the New Testament a little bit, and a lot about the women in the New Testament a little bit. That just made no sense. There have been a few women. Maybe not. They were all from the New Testament, weren't they? Except for, I don't remember who we've talked about now. Aren't you glad you're here? Don't I sound like a really good source of information? For your spiritual needs. Hi. Yeah, I just wing it. No, I have a hard time remembering what I've already said. So please go back and look. There have been several. I can tell you what. Here's my list. Let's look at the list, shall we? Okay. I know last week was Mary Magdalene. It's interesting to look at her. Well water, about the woman in the well. That's who we've talked about. Those are both New Testament women. Then we've talked about Mary and Martha twice. 2 weeks for those. Then Mary, the mother of God, Mary. The prophetess Anna, also New Testament. Proverbs 31, that was Old Testament. And then Esther, Ruth, Deborah, and Eve. Okay, so they're about 50-50 actually. 50-50 Old Testament and New Testament things. So, and we're going to end up with some other New Testament broads, as I like to say, because here's the thing. After the Gospels, Jesus is not there. Surprise! Spoiler alert, if you didn't know that. After the Gospels, Jesus, we see his death and his resurrection and his ascension right at the beginning of Acts, and which is not the Gospel, but also written by Luke, if you didn't know that. And that's where we'll be today. That's where the stories come from today. So these later women were so instrumental, the two we're talking about today specifically, because they are a part of the birth of the church as we know it. I mean, does that not, it's just mind-boggling to me. It's absolutely mind-boggling. And some of the notes that, like with last week or talking about Mary Magdalene, some of the things where when it says the disciples, other than when it says the 12, we know those 12, right? And then, but when it says his followers and his other disciples, that included women. There was a large number of women. And it's just been so encouraging to me to look at this and see the plan and to see the purpose and to see all the very many different types of women that God has used and that are in his story. And if you don't think that's important, I mean, clearly it's important. It was important to the Lord, and he values women and of course he does. He created us. He created us like everyone else. And it's not a, well, yes, and we're lower. No. We're the same. We're on equal footing here. And we are important to the spreading of the gospel and to uplifting and encouraging the church and to being involved there. So let's talk about these two women today. I'm going to start with a woman named Priscilla. So we're in Acts 18. This is where we meet Priscilla and her husband Aquila, or I've also heard it Aquila. I don't know. I like Aquila better. It's easier to say, but Priscilla and Aquila is fun. But this is a married couple. And let's just read the text first. So in Acts chapter 18, it says, after this, Paul left Athens and went to Corinth. There he met a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, who had recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla because Claudius had ordered all the Jews to leave Rome. Paul went to see them, and because he was a tent maker as they were, he stayed and worked with them. And every Sabbath he reasoned in the synagogue, trying to persuade Jews and Greek. So, now remember, Paul, or you may not know this, Paul was also a Roman citizen. And so these were Jews who had been in Rome and who had to leave because it says Claudius said, get out of Rome. We don't want you here. So they're now in Corinth, okay? And Paul seeks them out and stays with them. And that enough. And that he was a tent. And see, we learned something about Paul in that passage too. I didn't know he was a tent maker. Did you? Paul made tents. And this couple also was a tent maker. They had real other jobs that they earned a living doing, right? So, I mean, it's hard to imagine Paul doing anything other than being the Apostle Paul and traveling around and speaking the gospel. But here's the thing. I mean, he clearly was helping making tents at some point. It's interesting to me. But this couple, and he stays with them. Okay? So over in a little further down in the chapter, in verse 18 of chapter 18, it says, Paul stayed on in Corinth for some time. Then he left the brothers and sailed for Syria, accompanied by Priscilla and Aquila. Before he sailed, he had his hair cut. No, we're going to skip that. They arrived at Ephesus, where Paul left Priscilla and Aquila. He himself went into the synagogue and reasoned with the Jews. When they asked him to spend more time with them, he declined. But as he left, he promised, I'm going to come back. But he left them with Priscilla and Aquila. So listen, Paul thought enough of this couple to take them with him to help set up another church. We all know that Ephesus has a church. It has a book named after it because Paul wrote, all of these books are letters. They're called the Pauline letters. It's hilarious to me too. The Pauline letters of the letters that he wrote to the churches. Ephesus is one of those. Ephesians, to the Ephesians. And that is where Priscilla and Aquila were. Now, they also, and I love this next part, there was meanwhile a Jew named Apollos, a native of Alexandria, came to Ephesus. He was a learned man with a thorough knowledge of the scriptures. He had been instructed in the way of the Lord, and he spoke with great fervor and taught about Jesus accurately. Though he knew only the baptism of John, he began to speak boldly in the synagogue. And when Priscilla and Aquila heard him, they invited him to their home and explained to him the way of God more adequately. Do you see how they came alongside? And it doesn't just say Aquila. It also says Priscilla. And they were they were a team. They were a team. And what a beautiful picture of how to serve with your spouse. And they brought them into their home. And over the years, I've often wanted that Jim and I, that our home would be somewhere, that it would be a home like Priscilla and Aquila, that that people would come into our home and know that our house knew about the Lord. That is the picture that we're getting here. I want to be a Priscilla and Aquila. I want to be that. I want to serve in that way. I want to come alongside and encourage. I want to take what someone says and said, you are getting it so right, but let me tell you also about this. Yes, John baptized, but guess what? Jesus was baptized, And this is how Jesus does afterwards. This is what happens. Look how he lived. Look what he's done. I need some of their adequate teaching right now. That's what I need. I need them to come in and finish teaching this lesson on themselves. No, and we don't know much about them. That's about all we know about them. But they were instrumental in setting up that church. They were a husband and a wife. Now, I don't want anyone who says, well, I don't have a husband. How am I supposed to do that? Let me tell you about somebody else. Her name is Lydia. And Lydia is fascinating. So the book of Philippians, so in Philippi, right, which was, I read this was interesting to me. Philippi took its name from Philip II of Macedon, father of Alexander the Great. It was the eastern terminus of a famous Roman road known as the Egnatian Way. Thessalonica, where Paul would later found a famous church, lay another 150 miles west at the other end of this road. So Philippi was inland from a port, and it was like this major trade route. And Paul goes there. He lands in Philippi. And because this is what's interesting about Philippi too. There weren't enough male Jews there for them to have their own synagogue. There had to be, and I thought this was hilarious, there had to be a quorum. There had to be at least, what was the number? Hang on, let me tell you. And this book that I'm referencing here is the same book I've been talking about, 12 Extraordinary Women by John MacArthur. Oh, I got to hold it this way. Really interesting book. I don't always agree with what John MacArthur says, okay? So just have that. It's okay if you disagree with some of these writers, but it's really good. So anyway, in order to start a synagogue in any community, Jewish custom required a quorum, known as a minyan. And because we live in this day and age, now I'm thinking of those little yellow pill-shaped guys. They needed a minyan, which was at least 10 Jewish men. And that was any man that had been, Jewish male that had been, had his bar mitzvah. So that had come of age. That's what it counted. So they didn't have 10 Jewish men in Philippi. They couldn't get a synagogue. They couldn't have men could not meet regularly. And they couldn't, let's see, where is it? They could not, according to the tradition in communities without synagogues, the men they had to form a legitimate minyan before they could partake in any kind of formal public communal worship, including prayer or the reading of the Torah or the giving of public blessings. That's what men had to do. But guess what? Jewish women didn't have to do that. Jewish women could pray together in groups if they liked. Didn't matter. They didn't have to have a quorum. They could have public meetings and talk about, worship, pray, talk about whatever they wanted. You hear that? The men couldn't meet in public in a group. That was not sanctioned by the Jewish faith. But women could. And do you know where they often went? By the water, by a river. And so that's what, in Acts 16, that's where we hear about Paul doing this. Okay? Paul, on the Sabbath, we went outside the city. This is written by Luke now. And Luke, at this point, is traveling with Paul and Silas and Timothy. On the Sabbath, we went outside the city gate to the river where we expected to find a place of prayer. See, they knew where the women were going. And we sat down and began to speak to the women who had gathered there. One of those listenings was a woman named Lydia, a dealer in purple cloth from the city of Thyatira, who was a worshiper of God. The Lord opened her heart to respond to Paul's message, and when she and the members of her household were baptized, she invited us to her home. If you consider me a believer in the Lord, she said, come and stay at my house. And she persuaded us. So, women could meet and pray wherever they wanted. And it was custom that they would meet by the river. Paul knew exactly where to find them. And so he went and talked to them. Lydia was not Jewish. I don't know what the story was. I don't know how she became I don't know how she came to find this group of Jewish women that she went regularly and met and prayed with them and believed in God. And then Paul spoke to her. When he spoke to the group, she was like, that, I need that. Yes, I believe this. And she believed and was baptized. Like, remember, they're by a river. She immediately said, okay, let's go, and invited them to her house. If you think that I'm a true believer, come stay with me. And they apparently stayed with her a long time. Now, the two similarities here in these two stories is these women invited people into their home. They showed hospitality. The church in Philippi began meeting. Not that wasn't Jewish now, these were Christians. Didn't matter. They didn't have to have a minion. They began meeting in her home. And it says in her household. There's not any evidence to say that Lydia was married. She was a businesswoman. We don't know her story, but she probably didn't have a husband. We don't know why. We don't know if he had died. We don't know if she'd never married. We don't know if she had inherited this business, if she had grown it herself. But she was a very important woman. She was a businesswoman because she dealt in fine purple cloth. Purple cloth were for that's like a royal color, right? Lydia was important, and she was a businesswoman, and she was smart. And she was in this busy port city. What I read was she probably traveled back and forth from Philippi to Thyatira. Okay? Single woman. You see what I'm saying? It doesn't matter what your status is, what your marital status is. This was so encouraging to me to look at it and be like, this one's married and this one's not, and they're both effective. They both furthered the kingdom. They both shared the gospel. I mean, and I don't know if you've read the book of Philippians. That church to Paul was very kind. When Paul is writing to the Philippians, when I've asked you, you've given it. Whatever I've asked of you, you've done. It's a beautiful letter. A lot of encouragement in there. That's, Philippians 4:13 is like, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. Everyone knows that verse. If you're going to know a Bible verse by heart, it's either John 3:16 or Philippians 4:13, right? Yeah. That is this woman. That is Lydia. It started in her home. They were generous. They were kind. They took care of people. And they wanted Paul to come back to them. And he always wanted to get back to the Philippians. Two different women. One in Ephesus to start a church. I mean, Ephesians isn't a bad book of the Bible either. I mean, what one am I don't know what one I'm qualifying as a bad book, okay? I don't know. Maybe some of those. You know what? Leviticus gets a little rough sometimes, because that's a lot of rules up in there. But these two books, and Paul was a great writer, very passionate. These two books, the Ephesians and Philippians, like women were there at the beginning. And I'm sure the same can be said for all of the others. Well, maybe not all of the others, but my point is, these are churches we all know, right? And we've got a married woman and serving with her husband, and we've got a single woman. And I think that's encouraging. I hope you're encouraged by it. Doesn't matter it doesn't matter if you're a tent maker or if you're a fancy schmancy purple cloth dealer. I mean, those are two totally different types of occupations, too. And the whole point of this is look at the women that we have talked about. They are all across the board, all across the ages. I mean, Mary was a teenager when she had Jesus. Lydia is an older woman who has an established business. Esther was also a teenager. Ruth, she was from the wrong tribe. Look at these women. Mary Magdalene, she has a terrible reputation. I don't know why one has been assigned to her, but she was possessed by 7 demons. Look at these women. Anna, the prophetess Anna, she was old and a widow and lived in a church. Look at the difference. Mary and Martha were 2 sisters. Look at all these different women we see. The woman at the well. And my Aunt Judy made an astounding point to me. After she had listened to the episode called Well Water, she said, Emmy, that's what my family calls me, Emmy. She said, I just was thinking that you said she didn't care. She lost her shame when she met Jesus and realized who he was and what he could do and what he was offering her. She ran back to town and told all those people that that had probably shunned her and had gossiped about her, and she went back and told them it didn't matter. Her shame didn't matter. And Judy said, I also thought that she went back and told them even though they had shamed her, they had gossiped about her, they had shunned her. She didn't hold back from even telling people that she wasn't friends with. I think Judy needs to have her own podcast. She's very wise, that Judy Martin, yes. But look at these women. Look at all the things, all the different lives that they led. And Jesus is the same to every single one of them. We didn't even talk about the woman who reached out her hand and grabbed his garment, who had been sick, who had had a bleeding disorder for 12 years. She just knew she needed to touch the hem, and she would be fine, that she would be healed. We didn't talk about that because as Jesus realizes that he's healed this woman because he felt the power leave him, that he's on his way to heal, raise from the dead, a 12-year-old girl. What a testimony that young lady had. There are so many we didn't even talk about. They are all kinds. And Jesus is the one thing they have in common. And it's the one thing that matters. It doesn't matter what your background is. It doesn't matter what your occupation is. It doesn't matter if you're married, single, unemployed, stay-at-home mom, orphaned, a prostitute, a Republican, a Democrat, an American, a French. Y'all know I love the French. If you're French, you're English, you're German, you're Italian. If you're Arabic, if you're Russian, if you're Korean, it doesn't matter. None of that matters if Jesus is in the picture. Your denomination, Baptist, Methodist, Catholic, doesn't matter. Jesus is what matters. Furthering his kingdom, we were created to bring glory to God. And the way that people find out about God, how He shows up in people's lives. Huh. How has God shown up in your life? Number one. Number two, are you going to be like these women? You don't have to evangelize on a street corner. You can just invite someone into your home. Remember that Jesus loves you.